Their codes were broken. Our trap was set. I stood on the flight deck of USS Enterprise on the morning of June 4th, 1942, watching our SBD Dauntless dive bombers warming up for launch, engines roaring like angry lions preparing to strike. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly before us, painted gold by the rising sun, deceptively peaceful for what was about to become the graveyard of the Imperial Japanese Navy's proudest carriers. Somewhere out there, about 200 miles northwest of Midway Island, Admiral Nagumo's 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, the same ships that had devastated Pearl Harbor just 6 months earlier, were steaming confidently toward their target. Their decks were crowded with aircraft. Their crews were preparing for what they believed would be another easy victory. What they didn't know was that we had been reading their messages for weeks. We knew exactly where they would be, and we were about to spring the most devastating ambush in naval history. My name is Norman Dusty Kleiss. I was a lieutenant, junior grade, and a dive bomber pilot with Bombing Squadron 6 aboard Enterprise. Born in Coffeyville, Kansas in 1916, I graduated from the Naval Academy in 1938. I earned my wings in April 1941 and had been flying combat missions since the early raids in the Marshall Islands. By June 1942, I thought I understood carrier warfare. But nothing prepared me for what we were about to witness, the destruction of Japan's carrier striking force, accomplished in minutes, and the turning of the entire Pacific War. The ready room aboard Enterprise was thick with cigarette smoke in the early hours of June 4th. Lieutenant Commander Clarence Wade McClusky, Jr., our air group commander, stood at the front with a pointer and a map. McClusky had taken command of the air group only weeks earlier, but his intensity was unmistakable. "Gentlemen," he began, "the Japanese carrier force has been located approximately 200 miles northwest of Midway." He tapped the map. 4 carriers, Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. They're accompanied by 2 battleships, 2 heavy cruisers, and 11 destroyers. These weren't just any carriers. They were the heart of the Kido Butai, Japan's mobile strike force. Akagi and Kaga were Pearl Harbor veterans, massive ships that could launch over 60 aircraft each. Soryu and Hiryu were newer, faster, and equally deadly. Together, they carried around 248 aircraft and the most experienced carrier pilots in the world. Commander Joseph Rochefort and his team at Station Hypo had been reading the Japanese Naval Code JN-25. We know their operation plan. They'll strike Midway at dawn, then wait for our carriers to respond so they can ambush us. He paused.
What they don't realize is that we're already here. The intelligence officer briefed Admiral Yamamoto's plan, a complex operation to capture Midway and destroy our carrier force. Invasion forces from the southwest, a diversionary attack in the Aleutians, the carrier strike force from the northwest, and Yamamoto himself commanding from battleship Yamato hundreds of miles behind the main action. The Japanese will launch their Midway strike early, the officer said. Most of their fighters will be occupied. Their carriers will be recovering and rearming aircraft, their most vulnerable moment. He looked around the room. This is when we strike. Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie, associated with Yorktown's air group, was part of the broader plan, while on Enterprise, our dive bomber leadership included Commander Wade McClusky over the combined strike, with key squadron leaders like Lieutenant Commander Richard Dick Best in Bombing Squadron 6. We studied the weather. Wind southeast, scattered clouds, good diving conditions. I looked around at my squadron mates. Some were combat veterans, others were facing their first major battle, but everyone understood the stakes. The Japanese had better fighters. The Zero could outmaneuver almost anything we had. They had more experienced pilots, and we would be operating at extreme range with minimal fuel reserve. McClusky added one more hard truth. The torpedo squadrons will go in low. They'll draw the fighters down. Then our dive bombers will come from high altitude. We all knew what that meant. The torpedo crews were being asked to fly into near-certain death to open the door for our attack. By 6 a.m., the Enterprise flight deck was controlled chaos. Deck crews in colored jerseys performed specialized tasks with machine-like rhythm. Bombs loaded, fuel hoses connected and disconnected.
Engines checked. I walked toward my aircraft, an SBD Dauntless, while my rear gunner, John Snowden, checked his twin .30 caliber guns. Snowden was quiet, focused, and steady. "Morning," I said, climbing up. "Morning," he answered. "Gonna be hot today." I ran through the pre-flight, control surfaces, bomb rack, fuel. The Dauntless wasn't fast, about 250 miles per hour on a good day, but it was stable in a dive and tough as nails. It could absorb punishment that would tear other aircraft apart. At 6:45, the loudspeaker crackled. "Pilots, start engines!" I pressed the starter. The Wright R-1820 Cyclone roared to life. First to launch were the fighters, Wildcats, up for combat air patrol. Then went the torpedo bombers, TBD Devastators, heavy, slow, and heartbreakingly vulnerable. I watched them lumber down the deck with their Mark 13 torpedoes, barely clearing the edge. They looked like men walking into a storm with no shelter. Then it was our turn. Dive bombers from Enterprise, VB-6 and VS-6, climbed into the sky and began forming up. The launch was always dangerous. Enterprise turned into the wind and made speed. The flag officer signaled. The flag dropped. I released the brakes and surged forward. The island flashed by. The deck edge rushed at me. At flying speed, I eased back, felt the wheels leave the deck, and for a moment the heavily loaded aircraft hung in space. Then the wings bit the air. We climbed. "Good takeoff," Snowden said. "Thanks," I replied. "Keep your eyes peeled." It took time to form up. By the time our strike force was assembled, we were climbing toward altitude, then turning northwest, radio silence, fuel ticking away with every minute. The planned rendezvous with another group never happened. McClusky made the decision to proceed rather than waste fuel searching. We flew on, quiet, tense, staring into empty sky and empty sea. At the intercept point, there was nothing, just ocean. My fuel gauge had already dropped farther than I liked. We all did the same math. Find them soon, or we ditch. Then McClusky wagged his wings. Below us, a white wake, one lone Japanese destroyer racing northeast. McClusky turned to follow it, betting it was heading back toward the main fleet. For 20 agonizing minutes, we followed that wake, fuel draining, doubt rising. Then, at last, we saw them. The Japanese fleet appeared below like toys on a blue carpet. Carriers and escorts, wakes showing hard turns, aircraft on decks, smoke and movement everywhere, and, almost unbelievably, no Zero fighters at our altitude. They were all down low, finishing off the torpedo squadrons. McClusky's voice came over the radio. "This is McClusky. Attack!" Dive bombers rolled over into their dives. I pushed forward and nosed down. Acceleration crushed me into the seat. The altimeter unwound. 18,000, 15, 12. The carrier filled my sight. I could see aircraft on deck, crew running, anti-aircraft guns swiveling, black flak bursts around us, but I held steady. At 10,000 feet, I saw hoses and bomb carts, planes being refueled and rearmed, Perfect timing, their most vulnerable moment. Bombs began to hit, fire erupted, steel buckled, men vanished in smoke and flame. At around 2,500 feet, I pressed the release and pulled back hard, 9 Gs, vision tunneling, the aircraft groaning as it clawed out of the dive just above the water. "Hit!" shouted Snowden. I banked and looked back. The deck was a furnace. Within moments, Kaga was engulfed from stem to stern. At the same time, Dick Best and his wingmen diverted and attacked Akagi. Best's bomb punched through the flight deck and exploded among armed aircraft below. Akagi became an inferno. And as Yorktown's dive bombers arrived to strike Soryu, the third carrier erupted in flame. 3 carriers mortally wounded in minutes. Pulling away, the scene was almost unreal. Ships burning, explosions rippling through hulls, crewmen leaping into oil-slicked water. From operational warships to floating tombs in a matter of moments. But one carrier remained, Hiryu, operating to the north, partially hidden by weather, already launching counterstrikes. As we ran for home, Zeros came down on us. Snowden fired, tracers whipped past, his guns chattered, then fell silent. "Snowden, are you okay?" "Hit, but okay," he answered. "Got one." A Zero trailed smoke and fell away, but more were coming. I stayed low, jinking, pushing for every knot of speed. My fuel gauge was nearly empty. The flight back was a nightmare. Around me, Dauntlesses struggled, some trailing smoke, others running dry. The radio filled with desperate calls. "Engine cutting out! Going in! Ditching!" I watched one aircraft ahead nose down and hit the water, controlled, barely. The crew climbed onto the ring before it sank. My own engine sputtered. A few last gallons, minutes at most. Then Enterprise appeared on the horizon. The carrier turned into the wind for recovery. I called in for an emergency landing. "Roger, you're number 3. 2 aircraft ahead touched down. Precious seconds. My engine misfired badly. As I entered the pattern, it quit. Dead stick. One chance. I lowered the gear, extended flaps, aimed for the wire, and rode gravity to the deck. Wheels hit. A bounce. Then the hook caught, and the aircraft slammed to a stop. Deck crew ran in before the propeller even stopped turning. They pulled Snowden out of the rear cockpit, hit in the shoulder and leg, but alive. My plane had more than 40 holes. How it held together, I will never know. The ready room was somber despite the victory. Our torpedo squadrons had been devastated. Many crews were gone. Hornet's Torpedo Squadron 8 had been wiped out, nearly every man killed. They didn't score hits, but their sacrifice pulled Japanese fighters down, leaving the carriers exposed for our dive bombers. McClusky came in, wounded, exhausted. "We got 3, he said. Kaga, Akagi, Soryu, finished. Hiryu's still out there. She's hit Yorktown." That afternoon, we launched again. Dive bombers found Hiryu and hit her hard. She burned into the night. By morning, the Kido Butai, Japan's legendary carrier strike force, ceased to exist. In the days that followed, the strategic implications became clear. Japan had lost 4 fleet carriers that took years to build, but even more devastating, it lost thousands of trained sailors and airmen, veteran carrier pilots who understood the art of carrier warfare in a way that could not be taught quickly or replaced at all. The Japanese Navy never truly recovered. Midway proved that intelligence could overcome numerical disadvantage. Rochefort's codebreakers gave us the enemy's plan. Without that, we would have been reacting, arriving late, fighting on their terms. Midway also exposed Japanese weaknesses, a plan too complex, forces scattered across vast distances, and critical minutes of hesitation at exactly the wrong time. That night, as Enterprise steamed under the stars, adrenaline drained away. leaving only exhaustion and emptiness. I thought about the torpedo crews who flew into certain death. I thought about the Japanese sailors I had helped kill, men on burning decks, not faceless enemies, but young men like us. War is never clean, never simple, never glorious. Historians call Midway the turning point of the Pacific War. In one day, the balance of naval power shifted. Japan went from carrier superiority to parity, then, as American shipyards surged into overdrive, to inevitable inferiority. Real victory was not just ships and airplanes, but the combination of training, experience, morale, logistics, and production that made a force effective. Japan lost a generation of experienced carrier pilots at Midway. America's training pipeline soon produced thousands. America's industry would build carrier fleets Japan could never match. But Midway wasn't just an industrial story. It was also a story of decisions and risk. Nimitz risked the carrier force on intelligence. McClusky risked fuel exhaustion to keep searching. Best risked everything to strike a different carrier. Waldron and the Torpedo Squadrons flew straight into death because the mission required it. The battle lasted 2 days, but the outcome was shaped in minutes, those moments when dive bombers caught Japan's carriers with armed aircraft on deck. Small choices, chance moments, individual courage, history turning on seconds. The numbers tell one story: Japanese losses and American losses, carriers sunk, men killed. But each number was a human being with hopes and loved ones. We remember Midway not only as victory, but as an example. When tyranny threatens, free people rise. Courage isn't the absence of fear, but action despite it. Sometimes the fate of the world rests on a few brave individuals, and ordinary people do extraordinary things. That is Midway's lesson. On a clear June morning in 1942, the world's fate balanced, then tipped toward freedom.